December 16th, 1944, 05:45 hours, near Malmedy, Belgium. The frozen ground transmitted the vibration before I heard the sound, a low, rhythmic rumbling that could only mean one thing: tanks, lots of them. I pressed my face against the frosted observation slit of our camouflaged position, straining to see through the pre-dawn darkness and swirling snow. Nothing yet. Just the endless white landscape of the Ardennes forest and that growing mechanical thunder that meant death was rolling our way. My name is First Lieutenant James Mackenzie, United States Army, forward observer attached to the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. For 6 months, I'd been calling fire missions across Europe, directing the big guns that turned German positions into smoking craters. I was good at my job, good enough that they'd given me the equipment that would change modern warfare forever, even though I didn't know it yet. Strapped to my back was the SCR-694 radio set, 35 pounds of cutting-edge electronics that could reach our artillery batteries 15 miles behind the lines. In my hand was a set of binoculars fitted with an experimental ranging system. And in my field jacket pocket, wrapped in oilcloth and marked with red tags that meant classified material, destroy if capture imminent, was a fire mission card that listed ammunition types I'd been trained to use but never actually fired in combat. One of those types was designated simply as VT, Variable Time Fuse. The designation was deliberately vague, designed to reveal nothing about what it actually did. What it really meant was proximity fuse, a miniature radar system built into an artillery shell that could detect when it was near a target and detonate at the optimal height for maximum lethality. The Germans had no idea such a weapon existed. They were about to learn in the most catastrophic way possible. "Lieutenant, you seeing this?" Corporal Danny Fisher pressed against the observation slit beside me, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "Jesus Christ, there must be 50 tanks out there!" My binoculars found them as the dawn light began creeping across the landscape. Tiger tanks, Panzer tanks, Mark IVs, an entire Panzer division rolling through the forest in parade formation, their commanders so confident of their surprise attack that they weren't even spread out for tactical dispersion. They were driving in column, nose to tail, like they were on a training exercise back in Germany. "Count them," I ordered, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need exact numbers for the fire mission." Fisher began counting while I studied the formation through my ranging binoculars. The lead tank was 2,800 yards away, moving at approximately 12 miles per hour on the frozen road. Behind it stretched a column of armored German armor that seemed to go on forever. Tanks, half-tracks, trucks, self-propelled guns, all pushing west toward American positions that weren't expecting anything more than local patrols. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and recapture Antwerp. Intelligence had completely missed the buildup. 250,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, all hidden in the Ardennes forests, all about to crash into undermanned American positions held by green replacements and exhausted veterans sent here for rest. "We're not going anywhere," I cut him off, already reaching for my radio handset. "We've got them exactly where we want them." Where we want them? A German panzer column in perfect formation, bunched together, moving along a predictable route, completely unaware they'd been spotted. It was every artillery officer's dream target, and I was about to hit them with something they'd never encountered before. I keyed the handset. "Fire Direction Center, this is Oscar Foxtrot 27, fire mission, over." The response came immediately, calm and professional despite the chaos that must have been erupting across the entire front. Oscar Foxtrot 27, this is Fire Direction Center. Send it. Enemy armor in the open. Grid coordinates 589er 427. 53 tanks plus supporting vehicles in column formation. Moving west at 12 miles per hour. Request battalion fire mission with VT fuze. Over. Silence on the radio. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. 7 seconds. I knew what was happening back at Fire Direction Center. Some captain or major was staring at his fire mission log, seeing that I'd just requested the use of classified ammunition that required direct authorization from division artillery. VT-fused shells were so secret that even requesting them meant triggering special protocols. Oscar Foxtrot 27, confirm request for VT fuse, authentication required. I pulled out my authentication card, another piece of classified paper that would need to be destroyed if we were overrun. Found today's code phrase. Fire direction. Authentication is Whiskey Tango 49er. I confirm request for VT fuse. Danger close to friendly positions is negative. Target is in the open with no overhead cover. This is a perfect scenario for VT employment. Over. Another pause, longer this time. 10 seconds. 15. Oscar Foxtrot 27, authentication confirmed. VT fuse authorized. Stand by for shot. I allowed myself a tight smile. Somewhere 15 miles behind me, 18 105mm howitzers were being loaded with shells that would change the Battle of the Bulge. Each shell contained a miniature miracle. Vacuum tubes smaller than my thumb. A tiny battery activated by the shock of firing. A radio transmitter and receiver that could detect metal objects and calculate the optimal detonation point. All packaged to survive 20,000 times the force of gravity. The Germans called it Schwarze Magie, black magic. But it wasn't magic. It was American engineering at its absolute peak, and it was about to rain down on that Panzer column with devastating precision. Shot out in 60 seconds, Fire Direction Center reported. Time of flight, 37 seconds. Take cover. I grabbed Fisher's shoulder. Get down, all the way down. This is going to be loud. We pressed ourselves into the bottom of our observation post, really just a hastily dug hole with logs across the top, and I started counting. 60 seconds for the guns to elevate, load, and fire. 37 seconds for the shells to arc through 15 miles of winter sky. 97 seconds total before 18 105mm shells traveling at 1,500 feet per second reached the target area. The Panzer column kept rolling forward, oblivious. I could see German tank commanders standing in their turrets, scanning the forest, probably congratulating themselves on achieving complete tactical surprise. Their intelligence had told them the Ardennes sector was held by weak American forces. Their reconnaissance had detected no significant resistance. Their operational planning assumed they'd be in Liège before the Americans could organize a meaningful response. They were wrong on every count. At exactly 97 seconds, the sky above the Panzer column erupted. 18 shells, each carrying 17 pounds of high explosive, each equipped with a VT proximity fuse that detected the metal mass below and detonated at precisely 30 feet altitude. The explosions were different from normal artillery bursts, sharper, more focused, creating cones of fragmentation that swept downward with mathematical precision. A normal artillery shell detonates on impact with the ground, sending most of its fragmentation upward or horizontally, wasting energy. Tanks can survive near misses by buttoning up and letting their armor deflect the shrapnel. VT-fused shells eliminated those limitations. Detonating 30 feet above the target meant the fragmentation pattern covered a much wider area.
the fragments came down at steep angles, hitting the vulnerable top armor of tanks, killing exposed commanders, shredding the soft-skinned vehicles that made up half the column. Through my binoculars, I watched the Panzer column disappear into a rolling storm of fire and steel. The lead Tiger tank took a direct overhead burst. I saw the commander literally disintegrate. 1 second he was visible in the turret, and the next he was gone, erased by fragments traveling at 3,000 feet per second. The tank slewed sideways, out of control, its dead commander no longer at the controls. Behind it, a Panzer tank erupted in flames as fragments penetrated its engine deck, igniting fuel and ammunition. The crew bailed out into a
zone where more shells were already detonating, cutting them down before they'd taken 3 steps. A Mark IV lost its tracks to fragmentation, slewed into a ditch, blocked the road behind it. The vehicles following couldn't stop in time, couldn't maneuver on the icy road, piled up in a growing traffic jam of burning armor and screaming men. And the shells kept coming. Fire direction, this is Oscar Foxtrot 27. First salvo on target. Effect devastating. Request repeat fire mission. Same coordinates. VT fuze. Over. Oscar Foxtrot 27 shot out in 30 seconds. The German column was trying to disperse now, drivers recognizing they were under artillery attack, attempting to scatter into the surrounding forest. But the forest was deep snow and steep terrain, impossible for tanks to traverse quickly. They were trapped on the road, bunched together, and more VT fused shells were already in the air. The second salvo arrived with the same devastating precision. 18 more shells, 18 more 30-foot air bursts, 18 more cones of fragmentation sweeping through the stalled column. I watched a half-track carrying infantry take a burst directly overhead. The vehicle itself survived, but every man inside died instantly, killed by fragments that penetrated the thin roof armor like it was paper. A self-propelled gun tried to reverse, to back away from the carnage ahead. A VT burst caught it mid-maneuver, fragments destroying the gun's breech mechanism and killing the crew. The vehicle rolled backward, driverless, until it collided with a truck and stopped, adding to the roadblock. Fire direction, second salvo on target. Column is stopped and burning. Estimate 30 vehicles destroyed or disabled. Recommend continuous fire until ammunition exhausted. Over. Oscar Foxtrot 27 confirmed. Continuous fire approved. We're going to keep shooting until they stop moving or we run out of shells. For the next 20 minutes, American artillery pounded that Panzer column with precision that should have been impossible. Each salvo of 18 shells arrived exactly where I directed it. Each VT fuse functioned perfectly. Each burst created its mathematically calculated cone of death that gave the Germans no shelter. Tank commanders who buttoned up survived longer, but their tanks became blind, unable to move effectively without external visibility. Those who stayed exposed to direct their drivers died in the airbursts. It was a choice between slow death trapped in a stationary target or quick death from fragments they never saw coming. The German radios were going crazy. I could hear their transmissions on our monitoring sets, desperate calls for air support that wouldn't come because the Luftwaffe barely existed anymore. Pleas for artillery counter-battery fire that couldn't be delivered because German guns were far behind the advancing spearhead. Orders to disperse that couldn't be followed because the terrain made dispersal impossible. They were learning what it meant to face an enemy with complete artillery superiority backed by technology they didn't understand. By 0625 hours, the Panzer column had ceased to exist as a fighting force. 53 tanks had become smoking wrecks. 30 half-tracks were burning. Dozens of trucks and support vehicles littered the road. The survivors, maybe 100 infantry who'd bailed out of vehicles and found cover in the forest, were falling back east, abandoning their equipment, their mission, their dead. One American artillery battalion, firing 18 guns for 20 minutes, had destroyed an entire Panzer battalion that should have been spearheading Hitler's last offensive. Fire direction, this is Oscar Foxtrot 27. Cease fire. Target destroyed. Estimate enemy losses at 40+ tanks, 20+ half-tracks, numerous support vehicles. Requesting permission to call in infantry to secure the area. Over. Oscar Foxtrot 27 confirmed. Ceasefire. Infantry is being dispatched to your location. Outstanding work. Fire Direction Center out. I lowered the radio handset and looked at Fisher, who was staring at the burning column with something like religious awe on his face. "Sir," he said quietly, "what the hell just happened?" I said, "The future happened, Corporal. We just saw the future of warfare, and the Germans don't have a clue it exists." The VT proximity fuse, officially the fuse bomb M904, represented the convergence of American scientific genius and industrial capacity at levels the Axis powers couldn't match. The development program had started in 1940, when British scientists, desperate to improve their anti-aircraft defenses during the Blitz, approached American researchers with a revolutionary concept. What if artillery shells could detect their targets and detonate themselves at the optimal moment? The engineering challenges seemed insurmountable. You needed a radar system small enough to fit inside an artillery shell. That radar had to survive being fired from a gun, acceleration forces of 20,000 times gravity that would shatter normal electronic components. It had to function in temperature extremes from -40 degrees Fahrenheit to +140 degrees Fahrenheit. It had to operate reliably after being stored for months. And it had to be cheap enough to mass produce, because this was meant to be ammunition, not some precision instrument you could baby and maintain. The scientists who solved these problems worked at the Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University, at the Naval Research Laboratory, at the National Bureau of Standards, and at dozens of private companies mobilized for wartime research. Their leader was Dr. Merle Tuve, a brilliant physicist who'd been experimenting with radar since the 1920s and understood the theoretical principles that made proximity detection possible. The breakthrough came from miniaturization. Standard vacuum tubes of the 1940s were too large and fragile for artillery shells, but researchers discovered they could make tubes the size of peanuts, tiny vacuum tubes with elements so small they required special manufacturing techniques just to assemble. These miniature tubes could survive enormous shock loads and still function perfectly. The second breakthrough was the battery. You couldn't install a traditional battery in an artillery shell. It would be destroyed by firing forces. Instead, engineers developed a tiny glass ampule filled with electrolyte. When the shell fired, the acceleration shattered the ampule, mixing the chemicals and creating a battery that would last exactly as long as the shell's flight time, usually less than 30 seconds. The third breakthrough was the manufacturing process. By late 1943, American factories were producing 40,000 VT fuses per day, each one containing over 100 individual components assembled to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The production miracle matched the scientific miracle. This wasn't a prototype or an experimental system. It was a mass-produced weapon deployed by the millions. And the security surrounding it was unprecedented. The Manhattan Project gets more attention in history books, but the VT Fuse program was classified at the same level and subjected to even stricter operational security. Shells were shipped in special containers marked only with code numbers. Forward observers like me received training on employment, but not on how the fuses actually worked. Captured German technical intelligence never identified the system, never figured out how it functioned, never developed countermeasures. The Germans literally didn't know what was killing them. December 17, 1944, 1340 hours, near Stavello, Belgium. The second day of the Battle of the Bulge brought more German attacks, more Panzer columns trying to exploit their initial breakthrough. I'd been repositioned to a new observation post overlooking the approaches to Stavello, where German forces were trying to capture critical fuel depots that would keep their offensive moving. My radio crackled with urgent traffic. To all stations, this is Division Artillery. VT Fuse employment is authorized for all fire missions. Repeat, VT Fuse is authorized for all fire missions. No special authentication required. We're going to keep shooting until they stop moving or we run out of shells. That was it. The moment when our secret weapon became standard ammunition. Every artillery battalion in the Ardennes was being told to use VT fuses without restriction. Consequences be damned. If the Germans captured unexploded shells and figured out the technology, so be it. Stopping this offensive mattered more than maintaining secrecy. At 14:55 hours, I spotted another German column approaching Stavello, this time mixing tanks with heavy trucks carrying infantry. They learned from their disaster yesterday and were more dispersed, using terrain for cover, moving in bounds with covering fire. Smart tactics that would have worked against conventional artillery, but nothing worked against VT fuses.
Fire direction, this is Oscar Foxtrot 27. Enemy Combined Arms Force, grid coordinates 612-455. Approximately 30 tanks and 50 trucks with infantry. They're dispersed, but following a predictable axis of advance. Request rolling barrage with VT fuse, starting at coordinates 612-455, walking back along their line of march at 50 yards per minute. Over. A rolling barrage, continuous artillery fire that moved systematically through the target area, giving the enemy no respite, no chance to recover. With VT fuses, each shell would detonate at optimal height above whatever was below it. Tank, truck, infantry formation, command post, supply dump. The fragmentation pattern would sweep through the entire German column like a mechanical harvester cutting wheat. Oscar Foxtrot 27 confirmed. Rolling barrage approved. First salvo in 60 seconds. The barrage began at exactly 60 seconds, and it was like watching a steel curtain descend on the German column. The first salvo hit the forward elements, tanks that took fragmentation on their vulnerable top armor, commanders killed in their turrets, vision blocks shattered, leaving the vehicles blind and immobile. Then the curtain walked backward through the column at 50 yards per minute, each salvo arriving with clockwork precision, each VT fuse functioning perfectly. The Germans couldn't retreat, the barrage was following them. They couldn't advance, the forward elements were destroyed. They couldn't disperse, the fragmentation pattern was too wide. Infantry bailed out of trucks and tried to find cover in the snow. The next salvo caught them in the open, fragments cutting through their ranks with industrial efficiency. A Panzer tank tried to reverse at high speed, hit a tree, through a track, became a stationary target for the next salvo. A command half-track loaded with radios and maps took a direct overhead burst. The vehicle survived, but everyone inside died, severing the battalion's command and control. The rolling barrage continued for 12 minutes, consuming probably 200 VT fused shells, methodically destroying everything in a kill zone 400 yards long and 200 yards wide. When it lifted, the German combined arms force had been reduced to burning wreckage and scattered survivors fleeing back the way they'd come. Fire direction, target destroyed. Estimate 25 tanks destroyed or disabled, 40 trucks destroyed. Heavy infantry casualties. Recommend airstrike on survivors. Over. Oscar Foxtrot 27, airstrike is inbound. Good shooting. Division commander sends his compliments. Fire direction out. I watched P-47 Thunderbolts arrive 10 minutes later, their rockets and .50 caliber guns finishing what the artillery had started. The German offensive in this sector was broken, not because of American tank superiority or air power alone, but because of artillery employment that the Germans couldn't counter with any tactics they knew. The Battle of the Bulge would rage for 6 more weeks, but the outcome was never really in doubt after the first week. German forces achieved tactical surprise and made significant initial gains, but they couldn't sustain momentum against American firepower that included unlimited VT-fused ammunition. The statistics tell the story. During the Battle of the Bulge, American artillery fired approximately 2 million VT-fused shells. That's 2 million miniature radar systems, 2 million perfectly timed airbursts, 2 million fragmentation patterns that gave German forces no effective cover. The Germans recognized something had changed, but they never figured out what. Captured U.S. intelligence reports from January 1945 showed German analysis attributing American artillery superiority to better fire direction, improved ammunition quality, superior forward observer training, everything except the truth. A captured German artillery officer interviewed in February 1945 stated, "American artillery has become incredibly precise. Their shells seem to explode at exact height, to cause maximum casualties. We don't understand how they achieve this level of accuracy. It's as if their shells can see the ground and choose their own detonation point. He was exactly right, and he had no idea. December 24th, 1945, 0800 hours, near Bastogne, Belgium. By Christmas Eve, I'd been reassigned to support the defenders of Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division and attached units that had been surrounded since December 20th. German forces had launched repeated attacks trying to capture the critical crossroads town, and artillery support was the only thing keeping them at bay. The weather had finally cleared, allowing supply drops and air support, but it also meant German armor could maneuver more effectively. At 8:15 hours, I spotted a major German assault forming up, probably 40 tanks and several battalions of infantry preparing to attack Bastogne's western perimeter. This would be the largest fire mission I'd ever called. Fire direction: this is Oscar Foxtrot 27. Priority target: enemy mass formation preparing to attack. Grid coordinates 598483. Estimate 40 tanks, 2,000 infantry in assembly area. Request core artillery, all available guns, VT fuze, fire for effect, over. Core artillery meant pulling in every gun within range, not just my supporting battalion, but every artillery unit within 15 miles. Could be 60 guns, could be 100. Every battery would fire, every shell would be VT fused, and the result would be devastation on a scale rarely seen in warfare. Oscar Foxtrot 27, this is Core Fire Direction Center. Authentication required for Corps-level fire mission. I provided the authentication codes, confirmed the target coordinates 3 times, verified that no friendly forces were in the impact area. Then I waited while some colonel or general 15 miles away made the decision to commit every available artillery piece to this single fire mission.
Oscar Foxtrot 27, fire mission approved. Corps artillery executing. First salvo in 90 seconds. Time of flight varies by battery distance. Impact will begin at 90 seconds and continue for approximately 3 minutes. Recommend you take cover and stay down. 90 seconds. I found the deepest part of my foxhole and pressed myself into the frozen earth. Fisher was already there, helmet pulled low, hands over his ears. "Sir," he shouted over the sound of distant guns beginning to fire, "how many shells are we talking about?" "No idea, Corporal, but it's going to be biblical." The first shells arrived at 90 seconds, probably from the closest batteries. Then more arrived, and more, and more, building into a continuous roar of explosions that went on and on and on, each burst at precisely 30 feet altitude, each creating its mathematically perfect cone of fragmentation, each killing everything below it. I risked a look through my binoculars and saw hell on earth. The German assembly area had become a storm of fire and steel. Tanks were burning. Infantry formations had simply disappeared, erased by overlapping fragmentation patterns that left nowhere to hide. The few vehicles trying to retreat were caught by shells that seemed to follow them, detonating overhead with uncanny accuracy. For 3 full minutes, American artillery pounded that assembly area with every gun that could reach it. Probably 1,500 shells, probably 1,200 of them VT fused. The mathematics were staggering. 1,200 precision airbursts, delivering 20,000 pounds of explosives and creating fragmentation patterns that covered every square yard of the target area multiple times over. When it finally stopped, nothing moved in the kill zone. Nothing. The German assault had been annihilated before it could even begin. Fire direction, this is Oscar Foxtrot 27. Target destroyed. Complete destruction. No follow-up required. Oscar Foxtrot 27, out. I didn't have the words to describe what I just witnessed. The Germans had assembled a force capable of overrunning Bastogne's defenses, and American artillery had deleted it from existence in 3 minutes. Not defeated it, not forced it to retreat, deleted it, removed it from the battlefield as completely as if it had never existed. That's what VT fuses did. They transformed artillery from a suppressive weapon into a precision extermination system. The Battle of the Bulge officially ended on January 25, 1945, with German forces in full retreat, having suffered approximately 100,000 casualties while gaining nothing. American casualties totaled about 80,000, including 19,000 killed. But we'd stopped Hitler's last offensive and broken the back of German armored reserves. VT-fused artillery had been decisive. Post-battle analysis by Army Operations Research calculated that VT fuses increased artillery effectiveness by 500% to 800%, depending on target type. Without VT fuses, the Battle of the Bulge would have lasted longer, cost more American lives, possibly allowed German forces to reach their objectives. But the real impact was psychological. German soldiers who survived VT artillery barrages reported symptoms matching shell shock, nightmares, tremors, inability to function under fire. They'd been trained to handle artillery, taught that foxholes and armor provided protection, conditioned to endure bombardment as a normal part of warfare. VT fuses broke that conditioning. Soldiers who survived one VT barrage often refused to advance through areas where American artillery could reach them. Tank crews abandoned otherwise functional vehicles rather than risk exposure to overhead bursts. Unit cohesion collapsed when troops realized their training and equipment provided no protection against this new threat. A captured German officer summed it up in his interrogation. "Your artillery shells explode at the perfect height every time. It's impossible. Our scientists say it requires technology we don't have, but we know it's real because it's killing us. How do you fight a weapon that sees you and chooses its own detonation point? You can't. You just die." March 7, 1945, 15:20 hours, near Remagen, Germany. By March 1945, I was supporting the drive into Germany itself. American forces had crossed the Rhine at Remagen, and we were pushing east against collapsing German resistance. The war was clearly ending. The only question was how many more men would die before Germany finally surrendered. I'd called hundreds of VT fire missions by this point. The weapon had become routine, just another tool in the artillery toolbox. But what happened that afternoon reminded me why VT fuses were revolutionary. A German column, probably the remnants of 3 different units mixed together, maybe 200 men and a dozen vehicles, was trying to retreat across open ground toward the next defensive position. They were moving in dispersed formation, using proper tactical spacing, doing everything their training said to do when under artillery threat. It didn't matter. Fire direction, this is Oscar Foxtrot 27, enemy force in the open. Grid coordinates 678-521. Approximately 200 infantry and 12 vehicles in dispersed formation. Request battery fire mission, VT fuse, over. The fire mission took 40 seconds from call to impact, one of the fastest response times I'd ever seen. 6 guns firing 3 shells each, 18 VT fused rounds that detonated above the retreating German column with mathematical precision. The outcome was clinical. Each 30-foot airburst covered approximately 7,500 square feet with lethal fragmentation. 18 bursts meant 135,000 square feet of kill zone, more than 3 acres where nothing could survive. The German column, dispersed though it was, existed entirely within that kill zone. When the smoke cleared, maybe 20 Germans were still moving, and they were running, abandoning equipment, throwing away weapons, just trying to survive. The other 180 had died in 18 seconds, killed by a weapon system they never understood and couldn't counter. I watched those survivors disappear into the tree line and felt something I'd never experienced in combat before: pity. These men weren't fanatics or true believers anymore. They were just soldiers trying to get home, and they'd been caught by technology that made their training and tactics irrelevant. Fire direction, target destroyed. No follow-up required. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. I'd survived 20 months of combat, called 447 fire missions, participated in the deaths of thousands of enemy soldiers. The VT fuse had been central to almost everything I'd done, yet it remained classified even after victory. The official history wouldn't reveal VT fuse employment until years after the war. The scientists and engineers who developed it would never receive public recognition. The production workers who'd manufactured millions of fuses never knew what they'd built. It was the secret that won the war while remaining secret. But those of us who'd employed it in combat knew the truth. We'd witnessed warfare transform from an art into a science, from a contest of courage and tactics into a mathematical exercise where superior tech, regardless of bravery or skill. The Germans had mocked American artillery at the start of the war, dismissed our forward observers as overcomplicated, laughed at our reliance on radio communications and technical systems. They'd believed in the supremacy of warrior spirit, tactical brilliance, and iron discipline. They learned that in modern warfare, the side with better technology wins, regardless of spirit or tactics. They learned it at the Battle of the Bulge, where VT-fused artillery destroyed Panzer columns that should have been unstoppable. They learned it at Bastogne, where precision airbursts annihilated assault formations before they could attack. They learned it across Germany in 1945, where every attempt to establish defensive positions was crushed by artillery fire that gave them nowhere to hide. The VT proximity fuse changed warfare forever. Every modern artillery shell, every anti-aircraft missile, every smart weapon that detects its target and detonates at the optimal moment, all of them trace their lineage back to those tiny vacuum tubes and miniature radar systems that American scientists and engineers developed in secret and deployed by the millions. The Germans never figured it out. Even after the war, even after examining captured shells, they struggled to believe that such technology could be mass-produced and deployed as ordinary ammunition. It seemed impossible that America could build millions of miniature radar systems and make them reliable enough to survive being shot from cannons. But we did, and it won the war. I came home in July 1945. The VT fuse fire mission cards long since burned per security protocols, the technical details still classified. For decades, I couldn't tell anyone what I'd really done during the war, how I'd called down fire missions that killed with precision the enemy couldn't imagine. Now, 75 years later, the story can finally be told. The story of how American science and industry combined to create a weapon so advanced that the enemy never understood what was killing them. The story of how forward observers like me learned to wield precision death with nothing more than a radio and coordinates. The story of how technology changed warfare forever, one perfectly timed airburst at a time. The German tank commanders who mocked our 75mm guns learned their mistake at the Battle of the Bulge. They learned it when VT-fused shells detonated precisely 30 feet above their columns, when fragmentation swept through their formations with mathematical precision, when their armor and tactics provided no protection against weapons that could see them and choose the perfect moment to strike. They learned it too late, and by the time they understood what they were facing, the war was already lost. The shell that changed everything was just an ordinary-looking 105mm projectile with an odd fuse that looked like it might be a new type of time fuse. But inside that fuse was the future of warfare, a future where precision trumped power, where technology defeated tactics, where the side with superior science would always prevail. The Germans never saw it coming, and that's exactly how we planned it.